Hello, everyone. This is Jon Reed. I just got through taping a very interesting program, which you're about to listen to, an informal discussion with Clive and Greg, two frequent diginomica commenters and blockchain enthusiasts and advocates, to share an enterprise view on the blockchain and what it means to them and why they're so passionate about it. It was a good discussion. You're going to hear that Greg's audio was a little bit limited. You can hear him, but it's going to take you a little bit of effort. I'll do my best in post-production to boost the sound levels and improve that, but that is going to be a little bit harder to listen to than I would like, but it's a limitation in Greg's equipment that we just had to work with on this one. So I'm also going to be writing about this podcast, so if you find yourself wanting to not listen to the whole thing, then check diginomica.com and do a search on blockchain in my name, and you'll find the article as well. But anyhow, I think you will enjoy the discussion if you put on some headsets or limit the noise in the background. You should be able to hear Greg okay. All right, thanks a lot. Enjoy. And we are live, audio only, but with profile pictures. This is a special pre-holiday blockchain and Hyperledger for the enterprise informal chat with two guys that I am really intrigued to get their views. I've got Greg and Clive. How are you doing, guys?
Very good. Looking forward to the Christmas and all the festivities.
Doing good, John. Enjoying the last minute shopping for the family.
Yes, indeed. And for diginomica readers, the first thing you have to know is there's a pretty cool story behind Greg and Clive. So these guys are two of the most frequent posters on any of my blogs, and they usually have very strong opinions, which is always welcome. In fact, Clive is a regular on my hits and misses, so he actually gets like a special thing in the column itself, basically over to you, because I'm always waiting for his comment. But both these guys pester me constantly about the blockchain because they're super interested in the enterprise impact. And so I really wanted to better understand how each of them views blockchain and why they think it's so important, because obviously there's a lot of hype around blockchain as well. But it gets better because on Twitter, I don't know, was it like a couple weeks ago now, I'm getting these pings, and these guys, both of them, are at a Hyperledger hacking event in New York, and they end up meeting. So my two fave commenters actually meet in person. You just can't make this kind of stuff up, guys.
Yeah, that was quite a trifecta of connections there. We were actually sitting on almost opposite sides of the Hackfest room at WeWork in New York City on Park Avenue, with about maybe, I don't know, I would say perhaps close to 100 people from different organizations, folks from everything from IBM, Cisco, Intel, to Chinese companies, to folks from developers from the Linux branch of the Hyperledger Foundation, and including its director. And
so, Clive, how did you figure out that Greg was there? Did you first of all, did you know who he was from like some of your comments and discussions on my site and stuff, and you kind of figured out he was there?
Well, I'd seen Greg's name, but like many people, he has a slightly more cryptic name on Twitter as sort of a nickname. And I was tweeting with you, John, that I think I was at the Hyperledger, and then Greg chimed in that he was there, or you, and I think that you cemented that by saying, I know that you guys will connect there, and we did.
That is wicked cool.
Yes, I just want to say that I think this is the social media that's best between Diginomica blog postings and comments to it, and the Twitter. And I think it was Slack that I just started asking questions. One of the Slack channels that were connected to the event that kind of all three put us together. And I think that's one of the reasons we would have this call today.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Many years ago, I had a free night in Silicon Valley somewhere, and someone pinged me like, "Oh, James Governor's in town," and from Red Monk, and I think I'd met him once, but maybe twice. But an hour and a half later, I'm in a pub with James Governor, which of course is classic, and a new Red Monk hire, Donnie Burkholz, who's since moved on for Red Monk, but unbelievably classic evening that came out of like just some third party kind of putting us together on Twitter. So I find that stuff fascinating. Before we dig into the discussion, I just want to make sure that we don't talk kind of over our listeners' heads a little bit. So can you guys maybe just share a little bit about kind of how you see the blockchain and also a little bit about your interest in it? So like in terms of how it's defined, right? Because I'm not sure all of our listeners understand that this originated with Bitcoin and now it may have other applications. So maybe just frame that a little bit for us.
This is Clive here. I think that blockchain technologies can easily get confused with Bitcoin technologies because they're from the same branch of cryptography or database technologies. But the Hyperledger is quite a bit different than the Bitcoin technologies. Hyperledger is not a single blockchain project like Ethereum or like Bitcoin. It is a business blockchain technology based around a common ledger, and that common ledger can be used to arrive at consensus in business-related transactions that could be financial, that could be other types of transactions that go on. Many at this point in time seem to be the finance boys and girls are driving this. I'd say they're more at the head of the chain, to throw in a bit of pun there, not deliberately, but it came out, in terms of driving the use cases. And so that's just a little thumbnail sketch there. Probably Greg has got perhaps some better way to look at it.
For me, Hackfest was a little bit of homecoming because it took place right across from where I started in the ERP world with SAP technology, not for SAP as a partner employee. So this was a little bit of homecoming right across the street from Waldorf Astoria, and there's an office for Park Ave and Home Park Ave for KPMG. So this is how I started my career in ERP, and I think I'm still there pretty much every day. The Hyperledger piece, I think I got interested with Bitcoin a bit a year ago, and I was a little bit intrigued by how much noise it was making, and I think still is. And it kind of became much more than what was, I think, originally envisioned. To me, Hyperledger is financial services, first of all, but also other traditional ERP clients, customers' answer to Bitcoin. Bitcoin has this grassroots origins. It tries to maintain it. At the same time, there are wild promises that are being made what it can or cannot do. And some of it kind of spills over into the blockchain as well. But Hyperledger is trying to put some reason into this hype at this point, the way I see it. So it's Linux Foundation, so it has some credibility from a development point of view. But there are big contributors from traditional IT companies, IBM being the main driver, but not the only one. There's Intel. There's quite a few upstarts, or startups, I should say. So to me, since I've been associated with those technologies and I kind of practice them on a daily basis, I always had an eye on blockchain and anything that happens with ledgers, technologies, accounting, auditing, permissions, you name it.
Greg, you don't see this as a massive departure from your ERP roots? Because I don't think there's very many SAP financials people that are interested in blockchain or that even get that deep into the technology as you have.
I think the way, and again, I cannot speak for either IBM or SAP, or anybody else here, just for myself. I think SAP has interest, vested interest. It's an incumbent in the space as far as ledgers and payments go, by providing solutions to financial services companies and multinationals and all the large business players. I can't think of a company that doesn't have SAP implementation. If you look at Dow 30 or internationally, it's just there today. It kind of started in the late 90s, slowed down a little bit, mid 2000s. Now, you, John, are more familiar with the marketing message than I am. I just don't believe SAP wouldn't do anything in this space. I mean, they made some comments. I asked some questions on the publicly available sites. Usually, I get either no answer or kind of vague answers, but I definitely see interest from SAP and probably other ERP vendors. Oracle, Oracle, Microsoft. Microsoft is definitely dedicated, but I'm sure Oracle is working on it as well.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to just give you a little bit of personal background here to tell where I'm coming from and why I'm particularly interested in blockchain technologies. So from an early architecture stage to managing products, I actually worked in Silicon Valley for about 15 years on a product called Max. It's now a micro ERP product. Belongs to Exact Software in the Netherlands, and that product had a lot of strengths in traceability, particularly in electronics and equipment, small equipment manufacturing, anything from a modem to a medical device. And what I noticed is that it was such a small ERP system that it would often be chosen by a larger company when they were launching a new product that was growing so quickly. They didn't need an SAP product at that point. They just needed something that they could get up and going with. And then they had a plan in place to replace it by SAP, but they were running too fast to actually, and needed to be extremely nimble over a very short period of time because they're doing very fast engineering changes, and they didn't have many people. This was like extremely fast up and running and go. So I'd done some consulting before then, and I got to actually implement in this package, in this what I could see the business problems were in terms of bills of material and traceability, and then that led into an awareness, and I was working for a company called Keywell Systems at the time, of actually connecting SME type systems together in hubs and spokes, and when those hubs and spokes grew and became large, the difficulties of doing that with EDI type technologies. So I ended up working more in research engineering, and that took me actually into working with Google technologies, and I ended up working as a side project, an open source project called Camly Store that has a lot of blockchain type technologies. It isn't a blockchain at all. It's a personal data store. But I started building traceability systems based on this personal data store. I did one for basically a non-profit food distribution center that was staffed by AmeriCorps folks. And what I learned by doing that was that I needed the connectivity with blockchain, not just the technologies that I almost stumbled upon. So I was trying to solve the business problem, but I had the wrong technologies. And then when I discovered blockchain, and actually I discovered Bitcoin first, I actually spent some time working at a inside an incubator where there was a Bitcoin, early Bitcoin startup, and I was very friendly with everybody there. And so my awareness was very high. And so when I saw blockchain, I just had a feeling, almost an intuition, that here was the set of technologies, and I started learning everything that I possibly could about these technologies because I could see this as an open source project. And we haven't really had an open source project in the ERP field where people have been taking a use case and building in an open environment to try and develop the standards and the sample code and to start to scale out the technology to solve much larger problems. So that's my background and how I'm so excited about blockchain technologies and Hyperledger in particular.
Right. So just for our listeners, there's another piece of thinking around the blockchain, right? Because, so first of all, there is a blockchain with a capital B that underlies Bitcoin. What we're talking about in the enterprise is taking that underlying piece as an inspiration, a distributed ledger, if you will, for other types of projects, which is kind of how Hyperledger fits into the picture. But there's other attributes of the blockchain that have caused a lot of hype and attention that folks are interested in. And it has to do with its ability to, I guess you could say, sort of force trust upon a trustless environment, essentially, supposedly sort of being able to verify everyone's identity on a blockchain. So in other words, people have thought about the applicability in many industries where there might be unique assets that need to be verified. Land titles, for example, are one scenario that's come up sometimes. Identity management is another one where there seems to be a lot of potentials. So maybe you guys could just speak briefly to these other aspects besides just a distributed ledger.
I can take that, John. I think distributed ledger is actual new moniker for anything that business wants to do with blockchain. So I think it's much nicer than ERP. ERP has this kind of historical connotation that started again late 90s before we had mobile phones, smartphones, and even before .com in the early 2000s. Having said that, I cannot imagine a business without some sort of ledger, and it cuts across all industries. So right now, I see financial services, pharmaceuticals, and pretty much everybody who needs to run a ledger to use it as an underlying IT solution, which doesn't exist in the traditional ERP systems. And so it depends. Even so, recently there was an initiative around the financial reporting XBRL. They also want to do blockchain, so it's financial chain, if you can imagine. So it looks like all arrows are pointing to that sort of. The further Bitcoin soars, I think the more interest it generates. But it's also a big question mark. What if it fails? I mean, if everybody's going to just turn away from blockchain and just say, "Hey, the big experiment never worked." So there's this edginess, I would say, between the grassroots, what has worked so far, even if it collapsed a few years back, and especially in this year, there was some spectacular failures for blockchain, but it seems to have survived them. So I think we will see more than one in 2017. But the question is, will it have enough of steam that it gathered for businesses, large businesses and small businesses like seems like Clive is more on the small business side to actually make it a mission critical solution.
So I think what I can add to that is that that Hyperledger is the goal is for all intents and purposes, the direction is enterprise grade, modular, open source components and platforms that provide not only infrastructure but the platform for applications. And I find that exciting because I haven't seen that collection before in the that's applicable to ERP and financial applications available before. And actually, I'd like to go just a little bit back before where Greg has put a stake in the ground in mentioning ERP. I go back prior to that, actually working on MRP systems that were independent from a general ledger. So this micro ERP package I mentioned earlier started off as micro MRP, and it didn't have a general ledger. It had an ability to output a file containing all the general ledger transactions was quite often uploaded into an SAP system or a similar system of that type, so a headquarters type system. And so you could say, I could see from a patent point of view that we'd shipped thousands of these, and we never had a general ledger. They were always integrated with another system. And in here, I come across blockchain, and I can see that we have a common ledger, and that common ledger is can be distributed to all of the participants inside a network. In terms of Ethereum in the Bitcoin, it's sort of a big public network. In terms of Hyperledger, it's a business network that could be small, probably as just two very large banks doing business together, or it could be as large as a SAP supply chain for a complex product like the iPhone. So I find that technology really exciting, and just look forward to building and prototyping on it.
So I think there's a couple of pieces for the readers to think about in terms of enterprise adoption of blockchain and where it might go from here. I went to a show in New York City last May, Consensus 2016, which is run by CoinDesk, which is arguably the big blockchain show of the year. At that time, a lot of the enterprise blockchain activity and discussion centered around the Ethereum platform, which has since gotten caught up in some controversy around a hard fork issue, which I wrote about on Diginomica. But it kind of illustrated a little bit of the growing pains of community-based platforms. Now Hyperledger, these guys have described, which IBM is a major contributor towards, is sort of taken center stage. But one of these platforms would need to sort of emerge as I think, sort of a de facto standard or of sorts if we're going to get further from the enterprise perspective. There's other things to overcome. When I first started looking at blockchain, I was thinking that, companies might eventually, rip out their ERP ledgers for this. And that could still be true, but I think there's still a lot to prove around scale. There's more regulatory hurdles than I understood in some industries. So there's a lot in terms of a maturity of blockchain technology that needs to happen. But with that in mind, I'm kind of curious for these guys, like what kinds of of enterprise use cases do you see coming that you think are kind of a realistic next step for blockchain in the next year or two?
I think SAP already has done some testing and experiments with the payments with the company. I think it was associated with Hyperledger or Linux Foundation. I believe the name of the company is Ripple. I think they made a payment transfer, I believe $1,000 from somewhere in Germany to Canada, and this was a successful test. So there's definitely SAP doing something or publicizing an event. Again, I'm very SAP centric. I'm like 80% SAP, 20% IBM, if that makes any sense. But there's others. I mean, there's Microsoft. There was an event hosted by Amazon. They were on Wall Street talking about blockchain and getting everybody excited and what it is and how Amazon provides a solution. IBM's interest, again, they try to be as indirect as possible. I spent some time with the company. I understand their culture. They have very high profile, very many high profile customers and clients that they don't necessarily want their names mentioned anywhere. IBM is also trying to do cloud, Linux. So you start with Fabric, which is the main code for the Hyperledger, and you end up on Linux. So they kind of go hand in hand together. They want as much open source to be developed, and the contributions, the meetings are very open. They're weekly. But at some point, IBM will say, yes, we have a solution for our clients, and now it's purely IT solution owned, and the patents are filed, and everything is blessed by the legal team, and it's no longer open source. It's a solution that IBM sells to its customer base. So obviously, they're not interested in the repeat of Ethereum issues or any other spectacular market events. Like the most recent one, I think, is the Zcash. I think it started 10 million, and now it's around $10. So I cannot imagine another cryptocurrency coming out and saying we're using blockchain and it's valued. It's going to lose value 99% in the first weeks after flotation. That just cannot happen with something that IBM would like to be mentioned with. So I think we're still going to have an event like this in 2017. It's in the shadows. And the enterprises, the more they hear about it, the further they want to stay away from it. But right. Also in the Hackfest, the last meeting was with somebody from Ethereum. So you never know. The kind of open source community wants to get as many contributions as they can. I think it's also a recruiting ground for those companies. They want to have as much of free developer resources working on their solution as possible. So at some point, it becomes a proprietary code.
Right, and I think you're onto something here, Greg. As far as I do think that there's no longer a debate that open source communities and developer engagement, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a big part of how future solutions are developed, not just blockchain. And from that angle, I think, I see the relevance for enterprises right away. In terms of a specific use case, you were talking about the payment test that SAP successfully conducted. How do you see that working? Do you think that could become like an add-on solution that would be used for specific scenarios, or what would be SAP's next step, do you think? I realize you're not working on their product team, but how do you see that being used?
I think natural extension is for it to become part of S4HANA. It's going to be HANA Ledger or Simple Finance or Finance 3.0 or whatever the next iteration is. They will include it with their existing cash management solutions. That's the current state of affairs as far as SAP is concerned.
Yeah. So are you implying, Greg, that they don't have like that type of payment solution now, or that they would replace what they had, or what are you thinking?
No. SAP, along with financial institutions, is on ISO's payment standards committee, or whatever you want to call it. And there's existing payment solutions out of SAP, just like they are out of IBM and Oracle. So all those companies are competing for the financial services / treasury customer to do basic business, which is payments.
Right. So you think this could essentially add something? It's not about replacing the core ledger in S/4HANA, but it's about adding payment functionality that it doesn't have currently. In this case,
I don't think SAP is interested in anybody replacing their ledger solutions.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a market they want to dominate going forward. But hard to say. I mean, there's been disruption in the industry, so you never know who's going to be next.
Let me put that question to you, Clive, just in terms of enterprise adoption, because my feeling is that it's not going to be like a blockchain revolution per se. If blockchain takes over the enterprise in any way, I think it will be gradual. There'll be, and it probably will start with finance, but there'll be use cases that emerge that are clear, that show an example of what blockchain can do. Are you starting to see a couple of those that you think are interesting? I realize there's not a lot of products out there yet, but are you seeing some potentials?
Well, before I jumped on this call today, I thought I'd do a little research, and I just went and looked through the Financial Times. I searched on blockchain, and up popped Walmart, and not specifically Walmart in China. And that provided a little segue here for me to talk about or speculate about where I believe we're going to see a good deal of blockchain adoption. It's in more of the mundane things. I think that Greg's probably right in terms of SAP. But SAP deals with a lot of awfully large companies and moves huge amounts of cash around and finance. But I think there's a lot of small players in the supply chain that supply much larger companies, and those larger companies have are managing a good deal of liability dealing with smaller companies. And so I think the larger and the more mundane use cases are going to be more around the trusted environment. And the trusted environment, I would put into that umbrella things like quality control and certificate of ownership and certificates of compliance. So Walmart, for example, has a pilot. I think it's a production pilot, not a pilot, going on where their pork supplier, perhaps in China, is they can use, they have a blockchain application that is able to track lot and serial numbers or lot numbers through all the pork processing supply chain in China. I have a couple of friends. One is ex-McKinsey, and she formerly worked at, she just left a little bit recently, a major chocolatier that has manufacturing in China. And she was very involved with the quality, just making sure that China had a few years back there the tainted milk. And in fact, Chinese people still today buy milk over the internet, milk products, because they don't want to feed their babies anything which is tainted. So I think that the quality aspects in the trusted environment, the ability to connect in and authenticate quality will be a big use case in the ERP space. And I think that's also quite difficult to obtain and arrange with current technologies. And I also believe that in parts of Asia, that the sneaker or the sort of the running shoe market operates in parts of Indonesia, Vietnam, China, and it's a sort of a similar thing there. A U.S. company operating in that environment is dealing with smaller companies, and they've got to make sure those smaller companies do the right thing in terms of processing water and so forth. They don't want to have any sort of, could you call it like bad reputation, come back and be associated with their brand name. So they want to have a good quality operation, and so they want to monitor that supply chain. And so they want to authenticate. I think another use case may be a much larger company. Alibaba is sort of the Chinese version of Amazon. And they are, I was actually recently at a sort of I don't know what you call it, a job interview or sort of that type of an event where they had a large number of people, and their directors were talking about their capabilities and their goals, and they aim to be shipping something like, I think it's ridiculously large, like 3 billion packages per day by 2025. It's a huge number, and so the way a lot of those packages are going to go through, they have a supply chain arm. I think it's called Calico, and that supply chain arm needs to authenticate that some of those products, if they're purchased through Alibaba, are genuine products. For example, actually, I think the U.S. government put Alibaba back into the penalty box today for shipping counterfeit goods. So I think that certificates of ownership, authenticity, and compliance will be use cases that the big companies need, that tie in small companies. So I think we'll see some applications, more mundane applications, not as that don't have all the hype associated with them in terms of big banks. I think we'll see those in the enterprise space.
I totally agree with that. I think and what I would say is that in the enterprise, mundane is sexy. Solving these mundanities gains a lot of momentum for technology solutions. I don't know if you guys picked up on this from last year, but to Clive's point, Delaware has initiated some blockchain initiatives around record keeping for private companies. Delaware is kind of a big deal in the U.S. because it's the most popular state for incorporation for companies. And essentially, it has to do with blockchain's smart contract features, which essentially sort of automate a lot of processes and make transparent the process of contracts. And so, for example, like to Clive's point around authenticity, gets very complicated with private companies when you have various shareholder agreements that supersede one another. And so the state of Delaware has a pilot program they're working on that involves moving state archival records to an open distributed ledger. So anyway, it's just an interesting example because you have, to Clive's point, you have 1 million smaller companies incorporated in Delaware that are potentially impacted that could use this technology. Some of them are very big, but a lot of them are smaller companies. So these are the kinds of projects that I find interesting because while they're still pilot projects, they point to the potential to start having, public examples of how blockchain can work.
I just want to make one slight comment to mundaneness of payments. There's so much reconciliation effort spent on making ledgers show what they're supposed to show and then proving what they have shown. That's what makes it more sort of easier for the investing public, for the Wall Street, for the SECs, and host other government agencies. Just making sure that the numbers that are shown are what they represent. and I've seen some promises that blockchain is going to replace that, and it's going to disrupt that core financial task and the armies of people performing it on a daily basis. And to me, that it's very mundane, but it's irreplaceable. There will be people doing reconciliations on the blockchain, even though you have the proven chain of ownership. There will be issues with implementations, with forking, with versioning, your typical software maintenance. I just don't see it go away. So just because it's payments, I think it even requires more work. And will whoever wins the race, and there will be more than one player, will kind of be a new ERP or DLT, kid on the block.
Yeah, definitely. I think the interesting thing we should point out is there are a lot of skeptics. Steve Wilson over at Constellation Research is one of the prominent ones. He doesn't think you can move blockchain outside of its cryptocurrency foundation where it thrives without sort of undoing the security architecture. And so there's still a lot of resistance. Now, granted, you can get a lot of page views too by writing inflammatory posts dismissing new technologies. It's sort of
I would never do that, right?
Yeah. It's sort of the counter to hyping them. But I do think, there are a lot of critics who claim that the blockchain is simply a slow database that is designed for decentralized. And once you apply more permissions, credentials, and things like that, then you've essentially defeated the purpose. So it's going to be interesting to see how those critics respond when more of these projects are happening, because I think, to Clive's point, when you have people like companies like Walmart and Alibaba investing in this, it kind of shows you that the truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in the middle, right?
Yes, yeah, and actually, John, I should just make a correction there, or self-correction, and that was me. That was Walmart does have a blockchain, but Alibaba is more me speculating or imagining that that's going to be a very useful tool for them to let them get that scale. Just following up there on what Greg was mentioning. While we were at the Hyperledger conference, one of the very interesting talks was from Richard Brown of R3, the CTO, and the Corda software, the R3's flagship, had recently been open sourced, and they joined the Hyperledger Foundation as the sort of a third product project underneath the umbrella. And he spent a good time of actually talking along the lines of that Greg was just about the amount of effort that goes into reconciliation of financial transactions. And this was underscored by a conversation that went on after Richard had finished speaking about, that came up a number of times, about what happens in an enterprise database when you have a transaction that you want to reverse out of the system. So I think in a typical system, even though there's double entry bookkeeping, some systems actually allow you to delete a transaction. And one of the things about Hyperledger and about blockchain technologies is they are generally they are immutable. In other words, that means that if you want to delete a transaction, you don't. What you actually do is you actually put a replacement transaction in I'm almost contradicting myself over here. It basically mutates or changes that transaction. I think what I'm trying to say is that imagine this scenario. And this is the one I brought up at the conference. It was some folks were saying, okay, well, we have this particular case. I think it was the right to be forgotten. It's a big issue in Europe that US software vendors need to cater to.
Yep.
And so how do you deal with that with a blockchain if you can't do deletions? Well, so one way to deal with it is to use privacy and so that data remains in the database but is no longer viewable. So it's there, but it's actually gone. And I call this the delete. In other words, sometimes imagine, sort of like the few years back, the Lehman Brothers case, where we had a big mess in finance that almost crashed the world economies. If people had been able to delete transactions, they wouldn't be able to reconstruct, who owns what and how to put the whole chain back together again. So I think that blockchain could be very, very useful there because it provides this traceability, but at the same time, there's engineered solutions around that to deal with things like right to be forgotten, so that if all of a sudden law enforcement comes along and says, well, this whatever was deleted needs to be delete, so that we can reestablish what the chain of custody is in the database, so we can see that Lehman Brothers promised something and somebody else is due to be compensated for that promise. Went off track there a little bit, but I'm just trying to give some flavor for how strong blockchain could be in finance.
Right, because to your point, you couldn't hide the transaction trail behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's sort of an enforced transparency.
Yes.
Yep. And that's the idea, is that sort of bad actors, so to speak, it would be impossible to do it because you would not be able to hide anything. Mm-hmm. I sometimes call it enforced trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now imagine that over in the ERP space to deal with quality control. We've got this new federal requirements that folks are dealing with, the Food Safety Management Act, where we need to have traceability, and generally, I think we need to have electronic traceability. Right. So here we have a technology, and here we have some regulatory requirements. So let's put the two together and see if we can't sell some software.
Indeed. So, guys, we should wrap up pretty soon. I'd love to just chat for another couple hours.
Yeah, we could do it like the rest of the day.
Yeah. But I do just, before we wrap up, I just want to make sure the listeners hear a little bit more stories on the ground about your experience at the Hyperledger event. Do you want to share any other high points you had, either hands-on hacking or big ideas, anything else that came out of that for you?
Yes. So I think I attended about 3 or 4 different events in 2016. One of them was one hosted by, I think it was some kind of blockchain event hosted by MIT Media Lab. And I saw a lot of people, again, at the Hackfest. So there's definitely a lot of attention. Every participant in those events has a little bit different agenda. If there were banks at MIT, they didn't make themselves known as banks. There were people flying from, Australia, Japan, definitely a global event. In New York, I also attended an initiative that IBM is promoting through their Bluemix, which is kind of answer to Amazon's cloud success. So there were people from IBM or associated with IBM trying to recruit for IBM's. I saw it as a recruitment, but maybe it wasn't officially a recruitment event. But trying to get developers interested and engaged in any blockchain open source or at some point not so open source initiatives. So yes, this was definitely a blockchain year for me. They were all sponsored events. The big names were there, even if didn't announce themselves. There was a lot of attention, and hopefully in 2017 that there won't be another Ethereum, and that this will progress to more boring behind the scenes support type of work that we're familiar with from the ERP world.
What I think is a little bit of a highlight that ties something up, a loose end up, is that I believe there's now potentially 5 different projects underneath the Hyperledger Linux Foundation umbrella. And so there is the Fabric that I believe is IBM contributed. There's the Sawtooth that I believe Intel contributed. At the in New York, another company founders and another project joined. I think it's Iroha, which is a mobile-first distributed ledger technology from Japan, and they seem to have more use cases in this mobile-first, less business, more consumer identity applications. There was Corda from R3, which is sort of London and New York, in big strength in the financial. And there was also, as Greg mentioned, I believe Ethereum is potentially going to join. I'm not sure if that's going to happen or not. They were there, and I believe there was some side discussions about Ethereum coming underneath the Hyperledger umbrella. So, but actually all of those 5 projects have slightly different proof of elapsed time. So you mentioned earlier on in the podcast here about an issue in terms of scalability. Is 10 minutes too long to wait for a transaction? I think if anybody was buying an Oracle database, they wouldn't want to spend 10 minutes waiting for a transaction. They would expect that transaction to be lickety-splittity, and that would be considered completely ridiculous. But I think there's another aspect of this, and that is that when a database becomes very, very distributed, you end up with a situation. You can actually see this if you go onto Facebook and you post something on your wall, and somebody else posts something on the wall. Quite often, if you look at the 2 views on 2 different computers, you can actually see different views, and that is because the update into Facebook has not populated across all the network. It is a collection of distributed databases, and that is a sort of an eventual consistency. And eventual consistency works fine in a Facebook type application because it's not dealing with money. But I think that when business networks become very, very large, let's imagine there's an SAP parent company that has lots and lots of small satellites that are either its own or vendors, and there's a transaction that needs to move through the system. 10 minutes is probably fine, because it wouldn't move there any faster on EDI or any other type of technology. So the fact that we've now got 5 different projects, and you mentioned earlier, John, that probably one of these will be like somehow become very strong in the enterprise space. And I think that would probably happen there. But we've got these 5 different proofs of elapsed time, which it's a little bit of a horse race there to see which one is going to be the best solution. So I think that's very healthy. And there's sort of another aspect of open source.
Definitely agree with that. It will be an interesting year for the blockchain for sure. We should probably make a point to listeners that because it's an open source project, you can check it out and potentially start getting involved. This is not a passive thing for you. You can do what someone like Greg did, who's a SAP financials guy who dove in. Are you guys going to maintain involvement between events? Do you have little things you're tinkering with?
This is Clive here. I certainly do. I'm going to tinker around, and maybe I already made some connections at the Hyperledger Hackfest in New York City with a Chinese company that's quite interested in having me do some work for them, be their legs in the US. Apparently, one of the next, I think the next conference in quarterly conference is going to be in Hong Kong or Shenzhen, China. So, and there's something like 80 companies in China that are already interested in and have signed up to either with the Hyperledger Foundation or signed up to attend the conference in the March timeframe next year.
What about you, Greg? Do you have some sandboxes of your own?
Right. So I'm definitely kind of tagging along with SAP. SAP wants to do open source as well. The latest edition of HANA goes out to GitHub. You can go in and source your own code and then do version control and use all those wonderful tools that Hyperledger is using to a much larger extent. I don't see why SAP, Oracle, IBM, even with their own branded products, should go and kind of use anybody's help. I think you can contribute to Bitcoin if you want to. You can put your code out and say, yes, I think there's a deficiency here, and let the keepers of the code approve it or probably reject it. But yeah, I'm kind of watching that space quite often.
Greg, have you always been a technical guy? Because I know you do a lot of functional work.
Right. I'm definitely. I've been called recently functional,
yeah.
Or functionally technical. I just don't see the difference between finance IT and IT finance. There's no difference to me.
Well, I think that's where the professional skill set should be headed. So hopefully that will benefit you in your career path. Guys, I think we should wrap it. It's been an interesting talk. I look forward to hearing of your progress. I'm sure you're going to let me hear all about it in blog comments going forward. So I look forward to that also.
Thanks, John, for hosting.
Thanks for hosting this, John. Look forward to seeing the posts.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. All right. Thanks a lot.